My name is Fred Durr, and I have the privilege of being the Vice President of this splendid La Musica organization. And I will tell you straight from the heart, it's a labor of love. I've been at it for 16 years, and it just keeps getting better and better and better. It's phenomenal. And you're a splendid looking group, and I'm really impressed with the number of folks that come to the rehearsal. I think that's wonderful. And we have this afternoon with us a stage side chap with Dr. Christopher Lantz. And he's going to give us some thoughts about his paintings. And also, he's going to introduce us to an individual from another time and another culture who will give us a perspective on the composers of the Danube River, which of course is the theme of the concert series. I think you'll find this quite fascinating. And before I go much farther, I want to give credit where it's due. I want to introduce the hostesses of Dr. Lantz, Kat Durr and Jessie Dearwoman.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And also I want to give them credit along with Carol Membert for the art display, the display of his artwork. And I must tell you, when I dropped in Saturday afternoon to see it, I was just absolutely amazed. I haven't seen a better display in the Guggenheim, I tell you. They've done a wonderful job of displaying his paintings. And of course, Christopher will tell you a little bit about his paintings as the afternoon wears on. Christopher was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1936, and his parents were artists. And of course, this was during the time of the Depression, and believe it or not, his parents kept body and soul together by being the resident artists of the hotel where they lived. And so at an early age, Christopher began to get accustomed to the smell of oil paint and linseed oil. And I think to this day, that aroma probably still reminds him of those early days. At an early age, he was probably in 7 or 8 years old. He was trying to decide what the direction was going to be with his life. And of course, he had this tremendous exposure to art. And at some point, he became interested in music. And he finally decided that what he would do was follow his urgings in the music vein, because he felt that that was more or less a safe haven for him. He just felt more comfortable there. I don't know whether it's because of the competition from the parents or what, but this was more his thing, and that's the direction he went. And so at the age of 16, believe it or not, he produced his first symphony. And he subsequently went on to Juilliard. That's no small feat. And then on to Stanford. And at Stanford, he went through the various degrees right on up to PhD, and he got not only 1 but 2 PhDs. He got a doctorate of music, and he got a PhD in acoustical physics. Now there's a combination for you. By the time he was 23, he had written many of his own compositions, and he was traveling about the country. And while he was on this concert tour in Los Angeles, they encountered a musician's strike. And they were cooped up in this hotel for days, he and his group. And finally, out of boredom or whatever, he took the Mozart symphony and started cutting it up. And then he got a big piece of cardboard, and he started taking the music and pasting it on the cardboard. And that is the origin of what you see out there in these paintings called art scores. Now, the interesting thing about that, and this is what Dr. Lantz came to believe, is that music doesn't necessarily have to be linear. And this proves it, because the musicians can look at those paintings, the performers, and they can pick and choose whatever parts of Mozart or Beethoven or whatever it is they want to play. They don't have to follow the line. And so that is how these paintings came to be, and I would urge you to take a look on the way out. And also, I've been made aware that some of these paintings are for sale. At any rate, I would like to also now talk about his special friend. Now, when we were talking earlier, he said that he was bringing a friend from New Mexico, and so I quizzed him about this friend, and of course, being the interesting guy that he is, he withheld a lot, and we finally talked, and finally I found out this this friend is a prehistoric Indian of the Anasazi tribe. And the Anasazis were inhabiting northern New Mexico and Arizona, well over 1,000 years ago. And Christopher's thought on that, and one of the reasons that this is tied into what we're doing here, is that wouldn't it be neat to have someone from another time, in another place, look at what we like so well, which is, of course, the composers of the Danube, the Beethovens, the Mozarts, and so on, and see what this person removed by 1,000 so years thinks of what we like so well and what we try so hard to protect and call our own. So I think you're in for a very fascinating presentation by Dr. Lantz. And by now you realize you're not, we're not talking about a very ordinary person. Christopher is rather extraordinary, I think. And he has some very unique beliefs and ideas about the relationship between music and color and art and music as they influence our lives. So without saying any more, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christopher Lantz.
Thank you. And thank you for the society to have me here. And thank you for this morning and this afternoon's experience in listening to rehearsals. It's been 40 years since I sat in a rehearsal. At that time, I was a resident composer at Marlborough. And they say that was the golden age. Pablo Casals was there, Rudolf Serkin, Steiner, and there was this young man, Murray Pariah. He was 16 years old. So all these memories came back, and I thank you for them. And I can attest musicians are as fine today as they were then. What I'm really interested in is finding someone who could talk to us about our music, our Western music. But this someone had to be someone who'd never heard it before. That would be a totally fresh viewpoint. So where would we find it? We could go to the polar region. There's electricity up there, and if there's no electricity, it's a Walkman of some sort. So somebody's heard this music. Go to the central of Africa, same thing. Go to the, oh my goodness, you could go anywhere, to the Altai, to Siberia, to the Gobi Desert. Everybody's heard Western music. So there's nobody left alive. And I said, well, supposing we could go to the past, maybe to Egypt. But now we have a reverse problem, because no matter what this person from ancient Egypt would say, he's Egyptian, of course he'd say that. Or we could go to ancient Greece and say, he's Athenian, you know, that's how they think, and that's how they talk. So we were stuck with a problem, and I thought about this, and it struck me, hey, right outside my back door, there's this group of people who we really know nothing about. If you go to a bar in Santa Fe and mention the name Anasazi, within an hour, beer bottles are flying, if not wine. And everybody's shouting at each other because they all have a very definite opinion of these Anasazi. And there are very, very few facts. One is that they probably came in around 600 AD and suddenly disappeared in the 1300s. And in between, they built these incredibly magnificent cities all through the north, the Four Corner area, and specifically in what is called Chaco. But the viewpoint of anthropologists at the time, about 40, 45 years ago, was the Indians grew corn in this wonderful little valley called Chaco. And then, like any society, developed and grew and multiplied and built these cities and so on. And someone says, that's absolutely impossible. Chaco, the temperature ranges from 30 below zero to 110, and there's no comfort in between. I said, well, they really grew things there. They managed to. It was a little wetter than it is now. He says, anybody taking a look at the soil? There's still vitality. Nothing could ever grow there. Well, there's these great cities all over the place. They lived, there were hundreds of thousands of people living in them. Nobody lived in those cities. Well, look at all the apartments inside. Nobody ever lived in those apartments. We've done measurements and testing. There was no residue, carbon residue. Well, that's where they held the grain. There's no dust. What is going on here? And so one group says, well, there were great religious people who came from all over the area and built this city and series of cities and then go away and then come in and have their rituals. And other people said, no. There are thousands and millions of people living in those cities. They dwelt, it was a living civilization. And he said, no, these are magicians all over the world doing amazing things. Oh, no, not whatsoever. They're cannibals. They ate each other. Bah, that's not true. Those people, there's remnants of the Toltec coming up from the north and just ate a few people. There were wars going on between the cities, just like the ancient Greeks. No. Where are the bodies? There are only a couple hundred found in the whole place of Chaco. Oh, they are gentle farmers growing into this great civilization. What do you mean, gentle farmers? 40,000 Vegas, huge logs were brought down over 80 to 100 miles to build these places. They were the greatest astronomers of all time, probably greater than the Mayans, certainly greater than anything in Europe. Oh, come on, you gotta be kidding. There's a spiral here, and there are 3 huge 10,000-pound rocks measuring what they call a sun dagger, the summer solstice, the winter solstice. The equinoxes, the 16 and a half nodes of the crossing of the moon. That's a mistake. That's just pure accident. They could never have done that. All the cities are lined up to the Pleiades. No, they couldn't have done it. They were cannibals. What are you talking about? No. Then what happened to everybody? Oh, great tribes came in and they made slaves of them and took them away. They're from outer space. They went back to outer space. You see what I'm talking about? Nobody knows. So I said, gee, that would be great if we could get one of these guys to come up. Now, in the last 20 years, I've been working with some pretty magical music. So I said, well, I'm going to dust off one of our time travel symphonies. And I'm going to go 110 miles to the east. And, or is it, no, I went to the west. And I dusted off this time travel symphony, and I went back 1,000 years. And lo and behold, there I was on Chaco, over the cliffs, looking down the valley. And I looked for someone, and within a few moments, I saw this guy. And there's another kind of symphony we play. It's called the Heart Symphony. Now this Heart Symphony, when you play it, you can talk to anybody in any language because you're going from heart to heart. So I whistled a couple of tunes of that, and I went back and came up behind him and went like this, and he turned around, and he wasn't particularly surprised to see me. I said, would you like to come 1,000 full seasons of the future and hear our music? And he said, no. And I said, well, you know, we're very proud of our music. And we would really love to have somebody come who's never heard anything like it before and get your impression. And he said, no. I said, well, it's a very wonderful music. He said, no, go away. And I said, man, have you no curiosity? And he said, look out there. He said, each day eats my curiosity. And I said, well, that's too bad. I started to look around for someone else because we're going to be playing and talking about this music by this great river. I said, river, you said? And I said, yes, by this big, great river, far, far off land. He said, you know, water's sacred. I said, yes, I know, water's sacred. This river, does it have water running in it? Yeah. Does it have water running in it all year? Yeah, it has water running in it all year. How big is this river? I said, well, if this river could be lifted up into the sky, it would go from horizon to horizon. If you walked from the beginning to the end, it would take you a lifetime. And he said, how deep is this river? He said, well, it's like any river. You know, it's deep in some places, shallow, the sandbars, changes all the time. Does it have lots of water? Yes, it has lots of water. Is it deep? And I said, well, in some places it's deep. But is it so deep in these places that if I were at the bottom and the sun was shining and I looked up, it would still be black? And I said, yes. And I said, I think I'll come with you. But before I come, you're going to have to do something. I said, well, what's that? And he said, and I said, oh, before you tell me, you know, I got to warn you, I can whistle us both back to New Mexico, but we're going to have to take this iron bird across the land. And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're going to get in this iron bird, we're going to go across the land to a place called Florida. And he said, I don't think I like that. Where are we going to sit in this iron bird? I sit in the belly of this iron bird. We're going to sit in the belly of this iron bird. You're going to have to find two things from your time that is of our time. If you can find them, then I'll go with you and your silly and strange music to New Mexico, and we'll fly across on that iron bird. So I went back to Santa Fe. And the first thing I did was I looked around. I went to the Kiowa Pueblo people. And I said, have you ever heard of the Anasazi? He said, oh yes, they're our ancestors. And then I went to the Zuni and I asked them. And he said, yes, they're our ancestors. Then I went to the people of what they call the sun. And I asked them, have you heard of the Anasazi? They said, they're our ancestors. Finally, I went to Oriaba, to the Hopi, the oldest city in North America, hundreds and hundreds of years old. And I asked them, have you heard of the Anasazi? They said, oh yes, they're our ancestors. And we walk the sacred ways as they do. So then I went to the Anasazi ruins, Mesa Verde, Chaco, of course, Wall Peak, all the other places, and I noticed they all had the kivas, the hole in the ground. And these kivas were built very, very carefully, straight up and down, always round, some small, some large. And they had a certain pattern which particular religious ceremonies would take place. And then I went back to the Kiowa Pueblo, and I looked around, and lo and behold, there were these kivas. And you could smell the smoke. They had been used recently. You could smell the copal and all the incense. And I said, So I whistled myself back on my time symphony, and I said, your children's children and children say that you're their ancestor. I And I found the kivas. Kivas? What are kivas? I found the holes in front. You found the holes in the ground? I said, yes. And are they cared for? Are they made in a special way so the proper ceremony could take place? Yes. So he said, then I will come with you. So we came, and he's here. And he's on my right. It's very difficult to see him. You got to squint or look obliquely. But if you can't see him, don't feel bad, because nobody's seen an Anasazi for over 800 years. We're blessed with another guest who's on my left. And he's from Holland. He's contemporary. His name is Dr. Hans Peper. He's a musicologist, born and raised in Amsterdam, but an expert of late 19th and early 20th century music. And so I will be the moderator between these two people. Please forgive me if I don't try to mimic their voice, because frankly I haven't the slightest idea what they sound like. But I would like to, alsjeblieft, ik ga wel aan die gevraagd moet beginnen. No, please, we've decided we're not going to speak Dutch today. We're going to do this all in English. Yes, of course. I have one question, and that is, what is his name? His name is Ta. Well, are we going to hear his music from this period? No. Why are we not going to hear his music? He told me that if he played his music, you probably wouldn't understand it, and if you did understand it, you'd probably misinterpret it. And the third reason is that they don't play on call. But he brought a drum. Well, he's a very sensitive and kind man, and he figured that drums were familiar to all societies, and he didn't want to upset anybody by appearing here, so he brought a drum as a common courtesy, thinking that even in our culture we had a drum. However, I did bring something because I was really concerned that the people here may not understand what the Anasazi were really like. So, while I was back there 1,000 years ago, I did a projection on a camera that is going to be projected right across. There it is, it's there. There are some people who played the symphonies in New Mexico. They can see it perfectly. For the rest of you, I'm going to ask Dr. Hans Baker to explain it. So there it is. 1,000 years ago, this canyon called Chaco. Godverdamme, dat is erg mooi. Back to English, please. It is so beautiful. I'm on these cliffs, and the rocks go off in all directions. There's a canyon, 300-400 feet deep. In the valley of this canyon, I can see little villages or apartments or something. It's not like villages, it's big buildings. My goodness, there's one there that's bigger than the Colosseum in Rome. And they're all white, there's a little smoke coming up. It's late afternoon, and vermilion, all the greatest pastel colors bouncing off these rocks. The sky is cobalt, but it's going to late afternoon into purple. But what a brutal land. How cold it seems. How barren, no trees, no grass, no nothing. Just brutal, forsaken. I can't see how anybody could live there. It must be at least zero. And Dr. Pepper, what do you see off on this side here? Ah, there's Ta. And what is he doing? He's playing his drums. Can you describe his playing? Well, he's sitting on the side of the cliff looking over the Great Canyon. And he's just playing his drum. He's got a stick and it's a mallet and he's tapping it. Tempo of the tapping is probably about metronome marking 72. Fairly constant, not precise. Nothing else, nothing more to say. Do you see anything subtle in the drum playing? No, it's so simple. He's looking over the mountains, tapping his drum. That's it. Is there anything else you'd like to add from this? Nothing, but it's such a beautiful, brutal, forsaken landscape. Mysterious, frightening. It's frightening even to look at it. And to think that people built these cities there. It's incomprehensible. Thank you, Herr Doctor. Now is the reason that you are here. You've heard the concert, you heard Mozart, you heard Brahms, you heard Strauss. What is your view? Never in my life have I seen such beauty and sound. It is glorious beyond. I died, I dreamt, I was born, I made love, I sang, I danced and danced. I couldn't believe how my heart throbbed and shifted and turned. And my mind was so clean and clear. The music so controlled and organized. Nothing like that ever. I never imagined anything. And the pieces of paper that they were playing on, I can see how they could play those pieces anywhere in the world at any time and they'd play it, and it would be just alike. But that isn't all. You have true musicians of great magic here, because the man or woman, whoever created it, their soul I could feel in the music. It is beyond belief. If we had a music like that, I would walk with my head so high. Am I doing all right, Christopher? Yeah, Ty, that's great. But you're kind of like preaching to the chorus here. I mean, there's got to be, you really could go on for hours telling us how beautiful our music is, and we know it. That's part of the reason you're here. Well, I can go on. And I want to say one thing. The musicians, they were witches and warlocks of sound, because I could hear their souls when they played. But now, we could go on for a long, long time, as I said. Let's change this a bit. Do you have any questions about the music you heard? I have two questions. The first question is, what's all this going up and going down in music? And every piece I heard, there was this going up and going down. Those are dynamics. You see, in our music we have loud and soft. You say, no. That's the wind off the horizon of the rocks and mountains. I'm talking about this going up and going down. Oh, I see what you're talking about. You're talking about the melodies. You see, in Western music we have melodies. They can cause the affect of the emotions, of how we feel. They're what directs and gives the blood of the... No. That's the horizon. That's the rocks and the mountains of the horizon. I'm talking about going up and going down. Oh, Ta, you are very clever. That's the harmonic sequence of the music. You see, in our culture, we have what they call tonalities. And we go from one tonality to another tonality, to another tonality, and generally we go back again to the original tonality. And within these tonalities, we have a series of notes, and we have what they call modulation to another series of notes. I am so proud of myself for coming here. I knew when I asked you how deep the water was in the Danube and looked up and it was black, I knew you had to have a myth. And that's your myth. I said, well, what do you mean by myth? Myth is, in your language, you only have one word for it, and it isn't even defined. We have many in ours, but basically what it is the unconscious collective agreements of the people. The reasons that we act in harmony and congruence with each other. It's the thing that drives us and organizes us. It makes us unique as a people and a time. Most people live and die and don't know that they're living out a myth, but they are. It's the deep, profoundest unconscious, the collectiveness of us all. And you have a myth. And it's a good myth. It's a journey myth. Because you go from one chord to another chord, to another key, to another series of harmonies, and you come back. And it's a beautiful myth. It's a journey. It's a travel myth. I bet you people travel all over the world. Maybe to the moon. Because you are journey people. I bet you on your daily lives that you travel in your mind or in some way. I'm very proud of you to have such a myth. It's one of the great ones. How long have you had this myth? We've had it for a long time. Let's see, we have the contemporary, the post-romantic, romantic, the classical, baroque, the polyphonic. Well, we've had this myth as long as you lived in Chaco. That's a long time to have a myth. I said, yes, it is. What other myths do you have in your music? I really don't know, Tom. You people are beginning to worry me. I mean, you got one myth over 1,000 years of music? Herr Doctor, could you help us in this? Actually, Ta's right. We have one myth for over 1,000 years. Yes, there's some people who come in, there's some groups, there's the Roman coming in, and there's this, but for the most part, our music is controlled, even our popular music is controlled by the harmonic sequence of events. Wait. There's one moment. Oh my God, what for Danube? Yes. Yes, there was a moment. It was as though the Danube River had turned to a serpent, snuck up its fangs and turned its head and laid down beside it an egg. And then the fangs went down and bit that egg and it burst open. And then new form of consciousness developed. 1908, Opus 11. 1923, Opus 23, same time, same year. Vienna, Arnold Schoenberg. Atonality. At the time, we had no idea how profound this was. In my mind, it's the equivalent of Einstein's relativity equation. There were two things that happened between 1908 and 1923, and that is Einstein organized the atonality into what he called the 12-tone principle. It was called the Grundgestalt. And on the surface, it's kind of complex, but I'll explain it to you. It isn't so bad. It works like this. You have, if you have a piano, we have 12 notes. And Schoenberg said you can organize these 12 notes in any manner you so choose. You cannot repeat a note, and you cannot leave out a note. And then what you can do is you can turn that upside down. So it's up, you can play it that way. Or you can play it backwards. Or you can play it subdividing the center, having one part go this way, having another part go another way. Or you can break it into thirds and have it go this way, and so on and so forth. Or you can transmute it, so you take the whole 12 tones, go up 3 tones, and do the whole thing in the same sequence of intervals. They call it transmutation. So basically, that's it. Now, this is what's important. You don't do the row and then do it backwards and then do it upside down and do the transformations and then something. No, no. You do it all at the same time. So you have the row, retrograde, inversion, breaking into 5, 6, 4, 3, 2, spiraling left, spiraling right, coming out of a cloud cluster of 4 into 5 dimensions, all occurring simultaneously at the same time. And that's how it works. Now, this is an austere process of composing. And the first thing that became evident was that though it may appear austere, it allowed for composers to still express their nature. Alban Berg composed Volkslied in 1917 on a 12-tone system, a grand, rich opera. Webern, who was a friend and also a student, composed these little crystals of beauty, where each sound was a multiple dimension of another sound. Some symphonies lasting only 27 seconds. Beautiful, beautiful moments in music. And then what happened was a new world opened up. But we've got to go back a second and take a look at tonality. Because Tom, you've introduced something called myths in music, and there's another myth in our music that you couldn't possibly know about because you don't know our culture. But this myth, in any tonality, has 3 notes. Basically, the system of scales that we have is 7 notes. And 3 of these notes stand out. They're the tonic, subdominant, and dominant. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, the other notes in between, the second, third, fourth, the sixth, and seventh, they're considered support notes or passing notes, or they have all sorts of different names. But in fact, they're peons. And the tonic, the dominant, and the subdominant is the king, the queen, and the court. And then something terrible happens, is we have a diminished 7th chord, let us say, with maybe an altered note. And all of a sudden you find yourself in a new key. You have a new tonic, dominant, and subdominant. And then there's another revolution. And another chord comes in, and you find yourself in another key, and another king and queen and court takes place. And eventually, at the end of the piece, the original king and queen are there, and all the peons are back in their place. There's another way of looking at this, and that is it implies and executes on the principle of hierarchy of significance. Something is more important than something else. And when you have that, you have a continual revolution taking place, and so consequently, our music mirrors our historical events precisely. And they also mirror our daily events, because in even our daily events, we have hierarchies of significance. We have some people who are more important than others. We have some objects we prefer more than others. And isn't it interesting that they'll become the peons when a new revolution and a new series of tonic, dominant, and subdominant enter? Well, here comes Schoenberg, and he says, there is no note more important than any other note. Every note is allegory unto itself. It never loses its dignity. It never supports anything, but it can contain the information of many of these retrograde inversions, spiraling left, spiraling right, coming out of a 4-point circle, all occurring at the same time simultaneously. So one note can indicate 5 or 6 different things going on. This was a new consciousness. This was a new world. What happened was then Schoenberg, because there was a real ferocious chord introduced in Europe, every single note was altered, and it was a good time to get out. So he went to America, and ended up in California because his health wasn't so good, and taught in USC, and taught a lot of Americans 12-tone music and a new form of consciousness. And there was a beginning of a growth of what they began to call the avant-garde music. Herr Doctor, please, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it was at that time when I was a sophomore in college, I had my first major experience in life. And it occurred, well, about 10 o'clock in the morning in my dorm. And the sun was shining, I remember it clearly. And this friend of mine came in and he said, "Hey, Chris, you got to hear this." And he pulled out this record and he put it on. He said, "Well, I can't hear it because I've got to go." And he said, "Well, listen, it's only 2 minutes and 14 seconds long." I said, "Okay, put it on." I said, "What is it?" And he said, it's a favorite string quartet. Now, I'd never heard 12-tone music. Now, none of us had heard about it, but we've never really heard it. Well, he played this 2 minutes and 14 second string quartet, and I died and went to heaven. And I don't quite know what happened to me. I couldn't feel my legs, I know that. And I found myself with my hands like this, looking down. And when I eventually could talk, I said, "Thank God it's all over. It's all over. No more weekly, dumb, two-dimensional movie theater stories of the cowboys shooting the bad guy and running off in the sunset with the pretty girl. No more shooting for the great charging climax. No more charge of the light brigade. No more victory at sea. No more I'll think about it tomorrow, because it was all right there in my hand, a multi-dimensional, indivisible series of events that talked about a new concept of time." By the mid-afternoon, I had gone to the music department and I was trying to convince them that we had to get rid of harmony. Counterpoint was okay, medieval counterpoint was fine, but no more harmony, please, no more Brahms, no more Beethoven. Take what we had. Well, I was in trouble, but fortunately, Milton Babbitt from Princeton and Kirshner at Harvard kept me in the East, and I was able to finish. So I went to California as soon as I could, and there immersed myself in 12-tone music. Within 5 months of my graduate experience, we were giving concerts of world premieres up and down the coast from San Francisco to LA. Within another year, we were giving concerts in New York. The year following, we had our own orchestra, which I was conducting, giving world premieres in Europe. And there we met our brethren, Boulez, Berriot, Pousseur, and all these people, all doing the same thing. And we brought them over and had them playing their avant-garde music in our world. And it was a glorious time. The 12-tone was everywhere. I mean, people don't realize it, but there were composers you would never think of working with 12-tone who were trying it. Aaron Copland, he tried it. He didn't like it, but he tried writing it, and he said, "Not for me." But then there was Stravinsky. He's the icon of our 20th century, and he is the master of composition, the angel of music of our whole 20th century. And what does he say? He said, "I take no shame in writing on the coattails of Anton Weber." And then what does he do? He writes Threnny and Argonne, two of the most phenomenal ballets. They equal the Sacre de Printemps in 1914. This is amazing. But something happened. We came back from our third year in Europe, and people weren't playing 12-tone music anymore. Within 6 months, 2 magazines totally dedicated to 12-tone music had disappeared, Der Reihe and the Neue Musikgesellschaft. People who were teaching music in universities just weren't doing it. Doctor, what happened? Well, the truth be known, people didn't like it very much. Why? I mean, what's there not to like about it? Well, let's get real here. I mean, here you have this music where you have retrograde, inversion, spiraling, left spiraling, right 4-point star shooting off, subdivision 6-5-4, all occurring simultaneously at the same time. Who's going to be able to follow that? Well, that was never the intention. I mean, really, nobody could follow it, of course. But they were the threads of a new mosaic, a new pattern. And if people get locked up in trying to follow what chord and what position each note was and reflecting 5 or 6 other positions occurring simultaneously, they're missing the pattern of a new reality, of egalitarian view, of every note contained its own dignity and had the ability to reflect 5 or 6 different principles going on at the same time. Well, the reason they didn't like the music is because it failed to follow the fundamental laws of harmony. Well, what are those? Well, that, the Pythagorean scale where you subdivide the string and there's a natural law of harmony. So are you saying that the 12th tone disobeyed it all? Absolutely. Herr Doctor, I've got to disagree with you. Let me give you an experience. In the 1950s, late 50s, the world politically was a pretty horrendous place. There was a bamboo curtain, the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall, and everybody was having these horrible objects pointed at each other, and nobody could communicate. Except for this very strange situation where this Chinese boy managed to get out of China, knew nothing of Western culture, and could speak English. And he was coming to our college. Well, I said, And he was coming right from Japan and flying it directly, so I worked my way up so I would be part of the greeting committee. They shouldn't have done it, but they did it. Because if they had noticed, I had a phonograph in one hand and one of these portable players in the other. And I was the one who got to take him to his room. So after the few minutes of hullabaloo, we went and I had my photograph and I took him to his room and I opened the door and turned on the light and had him sit down. And he was sitting on the edge of the bed and he was really tired. And I should never have done this, but I did. I plugged in the phonograph, I put the record, and it was the Beethoven 5th Symphony, ba-ba-ba-bam. And I got a chair and I sat right in front of him and played this thing, and I looked at him, and the poor guy was totally freaked out. And I just terrified listening to this music. So I discovered 2 things. First of all, his English wasn't that good, and second of all, the music made no sense to him whatsoever. So, Herr Doctor, if you excuse me, the love of the music is a cultural experience, not that we're raised with, not some fundamental law of nature. Nonetheless, 12-tone music was over. And basically avant-garde was over. Jazz kept it alive in some form or another. And I went on to do other things in music. And as the universe turns, I found myself once again in the presence of physicists, mathematicians, biologists, and became engrossed in what they were doing. There was chaos theory, there was new complexity theories, and there was theories in particle physics. And I became very interested in particle physics. And these are the best physicists in the world that seem to come through this door where I'm involved in right now. And it got to the point where if a particle physicist came in, I latched onto them and spent days and weeks working with them. Because there was a certain particular phenomenon that interested me. and it was called string theory. Now, string theory arose out of a particular view of reality from a particle physicist viewpoint. And basically it comes down to this. There are certain energies that occur that create too far a influence than they should, say gravity. And there are certain particles that maybe have one or two spins that when they die or release or explode, have enough energy to blow up a whole star system. Yet they don't. And gravity continues to exert in relationship far too much influence of energy. So you have all these very strange things. And from a particle physicist point of view, we live in a bizarre universe. So I asked one physicist, well, how bizarre is it? He said, well, if you took all the Dr. Seuss books, took all the pictures and cut them out, and somehow superimposed them, and had some upside down and some catty corner, and somehow managed to project all that onto a wall, you're not even close. So the next step was to create some kind of theory that could entertain all this confusion of the release of energies, in particular particle physics. And they developed string theory. Now, string theory is a bad name, I think, because they're not really strings, they're tubes, imaginary tubes, if you will, hollow in the middle, all over the place. And these tubes are connected to dimensions. Okay? But there's not like 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3. It's not like a pancake kind of thing. These dimensions have their own set of rules. And some of these tubes connect these dimensions to one another in such a way. And on these tubes are these little nodules, if you can imagine it. And when these nodules hit other nodules, you have a release of energy. And so you have multiple dimensions occurring simultaneously. So then I asked one of these physicists, well, what about the 11th dimension? He said, well, that's the dimension of time. And I said, what kind of time is it? He said, well, it's hard to explain, but basically it's a present time. I said, was it like still time or no time? He said, no, it's live. Every event takes and passes through spirals and shoots up in many different directions. And I said, And then I said, well, can I be from here to there without going or walking across? And he said, well, actually, to tell you the truth, there's no reason for us to have a projection from one point to another. We can go from one point to another, bing, bang, bang. And I said, So why don't you encompass this in yourself? He says, therein lies the problem. We can't. I cannot experience movement from one point to another without a degree of projection. So, have you ever heard of 12-tone music? And I said, no. What we have in 12-tone music is this thing we have a tone roll, retrograde inversion, spiral left, spiral right, 4-point junctions, all occurring simultaneously. He was, really? I said, yes. And I said, that's string theory in sound. So, they became very interested because there has to be an emotional ability to be able to express this really important concept. And this important concept is egalitarian. Nothing is weaker than something else. It just works through many different dimensions. This guy, Alan Schoenberg, was talking about string theory 70 years before anybody envisioned it. And so now we have the beginning of a new myth. Yes, maybe the 12-tone did die, but it's being resurrected in another view, physicists. Maybe the next one's going to be another Jackson Pollock. Maybe a poet is going to say, hey, look, here's how reality really is. And so I think we're at the beginning of a new myth. But, excuse me, I apologize. You had a second question. Well, thank you, Christopher. The second question I have is, why do you people play your music? Doctor, would you like to deal with that one? Well, the reason we play our music is because it reflects our culture. It brings us pleasure. It brings us enjoyment. It is a type of music where we for a moment see the divine spirit in humanity. Maybe terrible things happen around us, but when we hear this music, we realize that there is part of the human experience that is unbelievably beautiful and wonderful and deserves to be preserved. It is a reflection of the individual existing within our culture at its highest moment. Thank you, Herr Doctor. This is Tas speaking. We also have a myth, and it's called Saprano. And in this myth, we, as a people, came up through 4 worlds. In the first world, and it depends on how my children's children wish to tell it. I'm not saying it's our myth. I'm not saying it isn't either. But in this original world, we had fins, some of us. And our world was all water. And we desired to come up to another world. And eventually we did. But in this new world that we lived in, which was half water and half land, we behaved incorrectly with each other. And so we became in conflict. And we lost ourselves. And we lost our center. And so we asked permission to come to another world, a higher world. And we did. And for a while everything was fine, and we kept our word with each other, but we lost our center with that which was around us, and found that it was separate from us. And so confusion entered, and our world became soggy, and full of weird things and feelings and muddy, and there was no firm ground. So we went to a 4th world. And for a while things were fine again. And then we once more lost our center. And so we asked Badger to go up to the sky and see if we could be invited into a 5th world. And Badger climbed up into the sky and he said, I saw a crack, but I can't get through. So they asked Grasshopper. So Grasshopper, can you go up to this 5th world? And he said, yes, if we could grow a reed quick and high enough. So they did. They grew a reed. And he climbed this reed and went through this crack in the sky, and he appeared in the 5th world. And all the spirits in this 5th world, through storms and lightning, hail and winter and ice, snow at him. And he stayed there and he played his flute. Cornet was his name. And after a while, the spirit said, he's pretty brave. He still plays. And he's still there. Maybe it's okay for these people to come to the 5th world. Maybe they've learned. So they opened the sky and people came up, and lo and behold, the land was firm. And they said, we will stay here in the center. We will remain centered. And we will remain whole. And we will have our kivas, our holes in the ground. And we will worship there, and we will come out, and we will play. So we always remember that we are all part of everything. Well, that's a very wonderful myth and a wonderful story. But you see, in our culture, we have a different problem. If you take our great river, the Danube, it's a way that we can get into the heartland of this nation. We have millions of people to take care of. We need these steamers to come up. We need our factories. We need our industry to keep going. Herr Doctor, if I walk down to the shores of the Danube, can I put a cup in the water? Can I drink it? Doc, you don't understand. We have something called industry. We have commerce. We have civilization. People work day and night so that they can have what they call a better life. It takes a compromise of energies. What the Danube is, the main artery to an industrial center controlling millions of people, all of which have multiple needs. A doctor, can I go down to the river and put my hands and drink the water? You don't understand. A culture must make compromises. The people must become flexible, working with an industry of economy, commerce. Hey, doctor, can I take off my shirt and my pants and can I bathe in this Danube? You fail to understand. It's impossible to explain to someone like you that, compromise of energy is necessary. I thought that for a minute, Ta is playing the strum. Can you hear it? Ta, why are you playing your drum? Ta, please, where you go? Sometimes I play my drum to bring balance. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't.